with income property. It's the most tax favored asset class in America, and you can trade it all your life. And under current law, now always check with your tax advisor because taxes and legal issues are very complicated. And
Yeah.
I'm not qualified to advise on them, but just conceptually, you can trade it for life, defer the gain, defer the gain, defer the gain. And when you die, you can pass it on to your heirs and it steps up in value to current market value. So, under the current situation, as I understand it, they could sell those properties and it's tax free for everybody.
I've went through a lot of the comments that we've received from some of our past videos, and I jot down the kind of the main questions that we've been getting. So the
Mhm.
first big question that we get is, Jason, I know that you like linear markets, but what,
Yes.
number one, what markets do you like and why? And does that change? Does that stay consistent? How does that work on your end?
Great question. So, as part of my 10 commandments of successful investing that you are familiar with, George, I always like to say we are area agnostic. We are not attached to any one market. We are completely disloyal to markets. Okay.
Mhm.
Usually loyalty is a good thing. Sometimes disloyalty is a good thing because we want to go where we can be opportunistic, where we can get the best returns, where our investors can have the best experiences. We like landlord friendly markets and we like linear markets, maybe hybrid markets, and maybe sometimes we make an exception and consider a market that's not as landlord friendly. Of course, it's a spectrum, right? There's New York and California, extremely unfriendly to landlords. And then there would be Arkansas, the most landlord friendly market in the country. And there's a spectrum of everything in between, right? And I do want to say to your listeners, there are markets we would like to be in, that we would recommend that we are not in. And one of the reasons for that, George, is that I always say that I would rather have a B market with an A team than an A market with a B team. So the team of people you're working with, the boots on the ground, if you will, is really more important than the market itself. Both are important. You could have a fantastic team in a market that makes no sense whatsoever, like New York or California. Of course, those are big states. I get it, but the main cities in those states, obviously, is what I'm kind of referring to. And you couldn't make the market work no matter how good your team is, right? But you could have a terrible team in a great market like Atlanta, Memphis, Indianapolis, Little Rock. These are great markets. And with a terrible team, they'll just mess it up so badly that, it's a balance between the
And when
two.
you say team, to be clear, because I
Yeah,
think a lot of people might not understand what your business is.
right.
What are you referring to when you use the word team?
Great question again. We do basically three things. You can learn more about this on my podcast or at jasonhartman.com, but we basically teach people how to invest in real estate. Our philosophy is very conservative, very prudent, and frankly, a little boring, but it works. It's just a very long, kind of slow burn approach to becoming wealthy through income property, but it works over and over again. It's been proven a zillion times over. So we teach people how to invest in that prudent, conservative manner. And then we provide a referral network of sellers, of brokers, of property managers, lenders, 1031 exchange providers, self-directed IRA providers, or solo 401k providers. I know you've had a lot of questions about that, so I want to make sure we
Yeah,
mention it.
sure.
And home inspectors, insurance people, all the people to sort of make it work, right?
Mhm.
And then, so that's the number two stage, the actual property. I didn't say that. We've got all those people, but we've also got the properties, okay? And they can buy those properties through our network. And then we offer ongoing support and software, and we offer that support for life. As long as we're here, we're going to be here to help our investors, and we've been doing that for the past 15 years. So those are the three kind of core pillars of things that we offer and we do. So when I say team, I'm mostly talking about our local market specialists, our property managers, our sellers, our
Right.
we call them boots on the ground people that are in that particular city. And one of the nice things to compare this with is if you look at all the other big real estate companies out there that have, a national or even a global presence, they have a very high cost of overhead. They have physical locations and employees and staff in each of these markets. And that prohibits them, George, from being area agnostic. It makes it impossible for them to be objective like we like to be, so that we can really recommend a market. And when we stop liking a market, we'll just abandon that market.
Mm.
Now, understand, you might be asking, well, what about all of our clients who already invested in that market for the past 5 years that you've been recommending it? Well, number one, a lot of those clients purchase properties at lower prices. So they have a lower cost basis and their properties are stabilized. So in the vast majority of cases, we just recommend that they hang on to their properties and keep them and run them, and we help them manage them over the years. I myself have properties in markets that my company no longer recommends. But
Mm.
those properties are stabilized. I bought them a long time ago. One example would be Austin, Texas. So I have property there. When I refer to a city, by the way, I mean the metro area. Okay, the
Right.
greater area. It's not exactly Austin. So we would not recommend Austin today. It's too expensive. The rent to value ratios don't work anymore. But the property I have there is still a good enough deal to keep. It has the rent to value ratios as properties appreciate get a little out of whack. So usually what I do is I do it for myself, and we also help clients do this. We do what we call a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 exchange, where they basically sell their property in that appreciated market and exchange it for 2 or 3 properties in other markets that are even more linear. I do that almost every year myself, and many of our clients do.
Yeah. And to be clear, when you bought that property in Austin, the RV
It
ratio
made
was good.
sense. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So off your
Now it's
cost
out of whack.
basis,
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to be clear for everyone there that's listening or watching that you calculate the RV ratio based on your cost basis or what you have out of pocket into the property, not necessarily its current value.
Well, actually, no.
No. Okay, well, that's
I,
why you're here, buddy. You're the pro.
Actually, that what you're saying is exactly the way most people do it.
Okay.
And it's understandable. I mean, I'm not debating that that's an understandable idea. The problem with that is, as humans, we all do this, right? We all have certain biases, right? So one is called the sunk cost bias, right? And that would, influence you. It'd be along the lines of what you said. And another one is, and I'll just create a new bias. I'll call it the positive cash flow bias. Okay. We just made that up.
Okay.
And or the equity bias. And what that does is it causes you to get a little bit too relaxed and a
Mm.
little too soft on your investments, because over time, as the property appreciates and you build equity, your cash flow improves. But what people commonly forget about is all this equity they've got sitting in that asset, in that property. And that equity always represents an opportunity cost, George. So, you always want to ask yourself, what is the highest and best use of that equity in that property? And look, you have employees, I have employees. None of us would want to hire a lazy employee, right? So why would we let our money get lazy on us? And
Mm.
that's what we kind of do as we let equity build up in our properties. So we did a prior episode about my refi till you die strategy,
Right.
and with the refi till you die, you're constantly equity stripping. And
Mm.
what that does to an investor psychologically is important. I mean, there's the sort of the hard side of investing, the analytical numbers side, and we're over some of that today. But then there's the soft side, human side, right? What goes on in our head. And as we develop equity and positive cash flow, our brain gets a little mushy about the return on investment. So my Austin property, frankly, I shouldn't own it. I should have sold it a few years ago, and I should do a 2-for-1 exchange. I'm not always my own best customer, and this is
Yeah.
one example of that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did the exact, or I am doing the exact same thing in Kansas City with those properties that I have because I bought them in 2012,
Yeah, and
and
they're
not only
appreciated,
that,
right?
they appreciate it based on my on what I have into the properties
Hmm.
because I not only bought them, but I bought them as tax foreclosure auctions,
Yeah.
and then I remodeled them. So I mean, I have nothing into these properties,
Yeah. Good for
and
you.
they've increased in value so much that I keep looking at my current rents
Right.
based on what I have in it. And I totally get what you're saying. I think I'm mentally being lazy just
Right.
because the return has been so good that I need to maybe reevaluate to ask myself if there might be a different market where I could strip that equity out and apply it somewhere else to make that money or that equity work for me a lot harder.
You're absolutely right. You always want to be making that equity work for you, and you don't want to let that equity become lazy. So
Mm.
when equity becomes lazy, fire it. How do you fire it? You either sell the property on a 1031 tax deferred exchange. So with income property, it's the most tax favored asset class in America, and you can trade it all your life. And under current law, now always check with your tax advisor because taxes and legal issues are very complicated. And
Yeah.
I'm not qualified to advise on them, but just conceptually, you can trade it for life, defer the gain, defer the gain, defer the gain. And when you die, you can pass it on to your heirs, and it steps up in value to current market value. So, under the current situation, as I understand it, they could sell those properties and it's tax free for everybody. It's just a beautiful thing. And there are some other strategies that maybe we can talk about on a future episode. Even 1031 exchange is certainly an episode in and of itself. There's a lot to know there. But just know it's such a tax favored asset class. You want to always make your equity work for you. We are in several great linear markets. There are others that we don't have teams in that we would love to be in. So if one of your listeners is listening to this and they live in a place like Charlotte, North Carolina, that we like
Right.
very much and we've been in,
Yeah.
and we're not really recommending it right now only because we don't have a team there, but we still think it's a great market. Okay.
Yeah. So
And,
so if they're
and yeah,
physically there themselves,
right.
it would definitely be worth exploring.
Yeah, they might be able to do it. They could learn from us and apply the techniques themselves if they want to do it themselves. Sure. Yeah.
Right.
And conversely, there's markets we like that we're not in that we'd like to be in. We just haven't, we don't have a good team there at the moment. And listen, that may change tomorrow, literally. We may find a good team tomorrow and open that market again. And then we have many markets where there are teams and they're pitching us all the time to sell their properties, but we just don't like the market. So that's the thing where you get a good team, but not a good enough market. One example of that would be Detroit. We have many people pitching us to sell their Detroit properties. And there is some case for it, but we just don't love that market. At least nobody has convinced us so far.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about that market, now that you mention it, is back on an old video, I can't remember when it was, but I actually, just right off the top of my head, I came up with this formula for determining what is a good and not good market to go
Hmm.
into, and based on kind of a 4-point grading system.
Hmm.
And number one was RV ratio. Number
Right.
two was price to income ratio.
Hmm.
And then one of the last one or the third one was the actual inflow or outflow of population. And the
Hmm.
reason I
Yeah.
included that is because, like Detroit, if you just looked at the RV ratios, if you just looked at the price to income ratio, you're like, wow, this is fantastic. Where do I sign up?
Hmm.
But then you see that it's got, let's say, 10% of the population leaving
Yeah.
every 2 or 3 years. And most people don't realize that that's really your biggest downside or your
Hmm.
biggest downside risk
Yeah.
to income properties is that if you're buying an income stream, so you're not really worried about
Right.
the price of the property going up or down, but you're worried about that tenant being there. If you have an outflow of
Sure.
population from an area,
That's a problem.
that's the danger zone right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That is totally the danger zone. There are some markets though where the population outflow is slow enough that you could milk it for a little while. Okay. I don't know. Detroit is just too mixed. And by and large, the action is in the warmer climates. I mean, look, we have exceptions. We have some Pennsylvania markets that we recommend.
Mhm.
Indianapolis has been our longest running market. We still like that market after so many years. But by and large, the action is in places like the South and Southeast. Okay. That's
Okay.
where most of it is. Okay. It's like that old saying, no rules or laws apply universally, including this one. you
Yeah.
know so everything's a judgment call. Everything has pros and cons. uh, you know it's not set in stone. Okay, and certainly subject to change.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
So another question that I get all the time in the comments is the difference between commercial and residential. And people
Ah.
always ask me to evaluate deals and say, "Oh, I got this building over here, or
Mhm.
it's triple net, and how
Yep.
would that compare to a single family, or even maybe a multi-family, like a fourplex or an apartment building?"
Right.
So I really wanted to dive into that a little bit and get your thoughts there.
That's a great topic. Great topic. So first off, we need to define commercial. Okay, commercial real estate. What the heck does that mean? Everybody throws that phrase out. Oh, I invest in commercial real estate. Well, what does that mean? Okay, to me, here's what it means. Anything that is a living unit where somebody lives, okay,
Hmm.
that is between 1 and 4 units is considered residential real estate. So a single family home or condo, a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, up to 4 units, residential real estate.
Got
And
it.
it's classified that way for the financing because those are the properties, George, that you get much better financing on, 4 units and under. Okay. So
Okay. Now,
now,
let me just interject
yeah,
one thing. On the multi units, can you still get 30-year fixed rate loans on those?
up to 4 units, yes.
Okay, got it.
And well, actually, no rules or laws apply universally, including this one. Okay. So you could get 30-year financing, fixed rate, even potentially on a big apartment complex. Okay.
Okay.
I just sold a 139 unit apartment complex that I owned with one of our clients, and we sold that for $5 million. A couple of years ago, I sold a 125 unit complex I owned with the same client, and we sold that for like $8.2 million. And we got some very good financing on both of those deals. I don't think it was 30-year fixed, but one we got a 10-year fixed. Not bad, not bad for a big commercial property like that. so
Hmm.
so let's go back to the commercial definition.
Okay.
um, so lots of types of commercial property, so you can't just put it all together. There's office space, there are industrial properties and warehouses. There are big apartment complexes like the two that I just sold that I mentioned. There are home park, a mobile home park, and I like that. There are retail centers, shopping centers, medical buildings. There's all kinds of stuff in commercial real estate. So, first off, what do you mean? They're very different. I like commercial real estate that is housing. Okay. Housing is the asset class I like. So it might be commercial, it might be residential, but it's always something people live in, whether it's an
Okay.
apartment complex or a mobile home park or a fourplex or a single family home. Housing, housing, housing,
Okay.
housing. Okay.
So
So,
why is that? Why do you prefer that?
okay. Good question. Number one, everybody will always need a place to live. That is a human need. It's literally part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Food, clothing, shelter, right? Those are our basic needs as humans. But after that, when you look at the trends that are occurring, when you look at outsourcing of manufacturing, where China has become the workshop of the world, right? You see a lessened need for industrial properties and manufacturing oriented properties. When you look at the trend of technology where people can work wherever they want, the lines between work and being off work have totally blurred over the years. So now people can work at home, they can work at coffee shops, they can work while traveling, and that lessens the need for office space. As you see all of the call centers going to India and the Philippines, that lessens the need for office space. You look at airlines like Southwest and JetBlue that have their people, their call centers at home. Everybody's answering the phone, for those airlines at home and making
Right.
reservations. And, you know, people are home based and they like it. People like to work out of the house. So that lessens the need for office space. You look at the retail apocalypse, as it's called,
Mm.
where the internet is just killing shopping centers and shopping malls and retail properties. It's devastating. And I don't know that it's very good for society, really, but it is what it is. And so that lessens the need for all those property types. At the end of the day, the only thing that wasn't affected and actually might need to be expanded was the home. Because if people have an office at home, maybe they need an extra room in which to work for their office. Maybe they have a business where they're selling widgets on Etsy. Maybe they're making paintings and selling it on Etsy or jewelry, and they need more space at home to do that, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
the home is key. They can't outsource the home. They can't outsource the place to live.
It can't be Amazoned.
No, it can't be Amazon. It can't be offshored to China or the
Yeah.
Philippines, right? Yeah, people need the house. Yeah. As long as
Okay.
the population's increasing, the housing is a good deal.
I completely agree. One of the reasons that I agree is for me personally, I like the additional liquidity.
Yeah.
And maybe this has just been my experience in the past. When I first got into real estate investing, I actually bought a commercial property just to give it a go. And I didn't like it
What
at
type
all.
of commercial property? What do you mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. This shows you how thick-headed I am.
No, everybody does it. They say commercial property. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was an office building.
Got it. Okay.
It was a two-story office building in the Plaza in Kansas City, which is kind of
Yeah, that's
their
a
nice
nice,
little
nice
area
area.
there.
I know that area. Yeah.
So I bought this and it was great. Awesome cash flow. Had a tenant down. It was two levels. So I had a tenant downstairs, a tenant upstairs, and the tenant downstairs moved after like a year and a half, and I went to lease it out. So you just put it up on the market just like you would a residential property. The problem was after, let's say, a month, it wasn't leased. And I'm like, okay, what can I do? What can I do that's proactive to get this thing leased out? So I went to the leasing manager or agent and said, okay, can I paint? Can I put new carpet in?
Yeah.
And she said, not really. And
Yeah.
she said, because the person that comes in, you don't know if they're
They're
going to
gonna
want it
do. They're
completely
gonna tear
different.
it apart. Yeah,
Yeah, they're going to
and
just
make their
white
own. Yeah.
box it,
Right.
and they're going to ask you for some TIs, which is
Yeah.
tenant improvements, so you can
Right.
kind of build it to suit their needs. So I'm like, okay, well, what leverage do I have here? And the answer to that question is basically none. The
Hmm.
only thing that you can do is drop the price, and even
Yeah.
then, you're kind of at the mercy of the market. Where if I would have had a residential property, I could have redone the kitchen, I could have put in
Right.
new
Yeah.
countertops, I could have redone the bathroom. And I know, just like you do, being a residential person, that if you do something like that, you're gonna bam, it's gonna be rented if the market's
Yeah.
decent. And at a worst case scenario, if you
Hmm.
just drop your rent by $50, bam,
Sure.
you got 10 people that want to hop in there and rent it. So that was the first thing that I did not like about commercial. The
Right.
second thing
Yeah.
is the lack of liquidity. That if you got an office building, even if the
Ah,
cap rate's good,
take
if you go to
forever to
sell that,
sell.
yeah, it'd take
Yeah.
you 2 years to sell the
Yeah.
thing. Where if
I
you've
know.
got a residential property, especially single family,
Yeah.
now you've got two buyers. You not
Right.
only have investors, but you've got owner occupants. So then if you want to liquidate that thing and the market's hot, you can sell it in 2 days, three
I
days.
love it. Yeah.
And and so if you want to take that money and you've got a better opportunity, let's say in Arkansas or
Yeah.
Florida or just somewhere outside that equity stripping, and you want to actually sell,
Right.
then you can do
Yeah.
it so much faster and get that equity back to work for you,
Hmm.
bringing in that positive cash flow. So that's why I really like it. What do you think about that?
I think you are absolutely right. There are so many more things I've done some podcasts on this. I did one where I think we went on for and it was just me talking monologue for like 60 minutes where I compared so many differences. In commercial real estate, no matter what kind of commercial real estate it is, you're going to be dealing with business people. And business people are less emotion oriented.
Right.
Okay. And look, if things get bad, they can let their business fail and they'll leave, but they don't want to lose their house. They still need a place to live. And you can't apply as much creativity, right? You can't, like you said, George, fix it up and make it look nice and present it well. Even after that you talked about TIs or tenant improvements, right? Every tenant is going to want to knock out all the walls and
Yeah,
redesign and
exactly.
reconfigure the space differently. And you know what? That is complicated. You got to deal with contractors and liability issues like crazy. And if they don't pay their contractor sues you because you own the property. The leases are 130 pages long. It's just too complicated.
Yeah.
And listen, I have leased personally myself for my companies over the years several commercial office spaces, and let me tell you, it is it is complicated. I don't want to be the tenant or the landlord. I
Yeah.
hate both positions in that scenario. So yeah, it's things are just it's just too complicated.
Yeah, another big downside too is you can drop 20 grand on TIs
Right.
and they break the lease, they move out in 3 months, then the
And you
next
got to
tenant
redo it.
comes in,
Yeah.
well, yeah, another 20 grand redoing it from
Yeah.
scratch. Yeah,
Yeah.
so just going one step further, how would you differentiate as far as pros and cons between multifamily residential and single family residential?
Okay, great question. Before I get to that, let me just go one more thing on the broad issue. Commercial properties, the financing is not as good as it is on the residential properties. And remember, you want to really appreciate the fact that income property, especially in the single family home world, is the most debt favored asset class in America. And meaning you can get really good debt on it. Debt is my favorite four-letter word. Okay. And listen, I don't have any consumer debt, okay? Just mortgages. And I love my mortgages. They're part of the asset. We did a show before, George, on inflation-induced debt destruction and illustrated that in great detail. Hopefully your listeners really enjoyed that one. And I'd refer your viewers back to that
Yeah,
because it really talks about how that debt is so valuable to you.
you
So
just
the
get paid to
debt,
short the dollar.
yeah, you're shorting the dollar, you're arbitraging inflation. It's a beautiful thing. So the debt is more favorable on the residential properties, number one. Also, income property is the most tax favored asset class in America. Residential property is depreciated over 27.5 years,
Hmm.
whereas commercial property is depreciated over, I think, 39 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds right.
And so that's literally about 25% difference. Now, this depreciation I'm talking about is good depreciation. It means tax benefits to you, the owner. So you want the shortest possible depreciation schedule on your properties so you can get that tax benefit more quickly. And you get it more quickly on the residential properties. So there's a couple more, I mean, many more things that just make it a better asset class. So now you asked about the difference between small housing units and big multiple housing units and
or
apartment
just
complexes.
or just single family
Yeah,
and just multifamily like a triplex or fourplex compared to
got
just
it.
a home with a on a 10,000 square foot lot.
Yeah, great question. So, number one, let's talk about tenant quality. The best tenant quality will almost always be in single family homes,
Hmm.
especially in nicer single family homes in not great because a great neighborhood costs too much money, okay? And a great school district costs too much money, okay? But you want to get a good enough neighborhood and a good enough school district, okay? And that tenant will not want to move often. They will stay in that property longer, and in fact, if they have kids and those kids are in that school district, they will
Right.
fight to stay there, okay? They will really, really, you get more stability out of them. In
Hmm.
apartments, and look, I own apartments, I own a mobile home park, and it's not that I dislike one or the other, okay? Everything has pros and cons in life, but you get much more transient tenants. much lower quality tenants in apartments than you do in single family homes. It's just a world of difference. Now, saying that, can you get a rotten tenant in a nice single family home? Sure, you can. Can you get a great tenant in a cheap apartment? Yeah, you can. But by and large, law of large numbers, it's going to be the way I said.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah,
quality
just to
tenants.
throw in a
Yeah.
yeah, just to throw in a quick example, those first properties that I bought in 2012,
Hmm.
uh, I still have a tenant in one of those properties
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
That's what, 8 years later,
Yeah.
there's still their same tenant for the exact reason that
Isn't
you
that great?
talked about,
Yeah.
the school district. They had
Yep.
little kids in there when they came in. Now
Yep.
the kids are in whatever, eighth, ninth grade, and they don't want to take them out of that school.
They will fight to stay there. The only thing that person is really going to do is move up to be a homeowner, and they're going to move in the same school district and buy the house around the corner. If they
Mm,
don't move up to the homeowner class, they're going to be your tenant for probably a long time. The longest tenant I ever had, I think, was 9 years. Okay. And my mother still,
yeah.
this is amazing. I've had
Yeah,
her on my
actually, I was going to
podcast.
bring that up
Yeah.
because I remember
Yeah.
you saying that from a podcast episode
Yeah.
about your mom.
Yeah. My mom is a rental property investor, and she on one of her properties, and she's been on my show talking about it. She's had the same tenant since, you ready for this? 1989. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
1989. The guy is a truck driver, and he has lived in that same property since 1989. He's handy. He repairs everything. He fixes the house up. It's amazing. He acts like he owns it, and he's
Yeah.
not the owner, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So tenant quality. You also asked about, just plexes, right? Duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes,
Mhm.
still considered residential properties by financing residential. Okay. What's the difference between those properties and a 100-unit apartment complex? This is the difference in terms of tenant quality. So let's take a $100,000 single family home in a good enough neighborhood and a good enough school district, right? And we'll say that that's an A property. Maybe it's really not. Maybe it's a B property. But for illustration purposes, number one, it used to be an A property a few years ago. Prices have gone up, folks. The A property is now 150,000. Okay, so whatever. But you've got this A property that's a single family home. And generally speaking, the A property will attract an A tenant. Okay. Now,
Mm.
if it's the same age and type of duplex, triplex, or fourplex in still a nice neighborhood, okay, similar kind of neighborhood, kind of try and equalize it as much as you can. The plex is going to bring you, even though it's an A property, it's going to bring you a B tenant. Your
Right.
tenant is going to notch down one level in a plex. That's what we've found over the years. In a single family home, it'll be on par. In a plex, it'll be a notch below. That
Yeah.
tenant will be. Okay. And in an apartment complex, it's going to be two notches below. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, that makes total sense. So I've got a good idea of what your framework is there. Now, on past episodes, we talked briefly about how people can make money on inflation
Hmm.
through investing in rental properties or income properties. And this is because their cost basis is a lot
Right.
lower than the value of the property because they're using leverage wisely. Well, let's preface
Yeah.
with that. And so we only touched on it briefly. So can you expand on that a bit? Because this is just so important for the
It
majority of people
is.
out there,
Yeah.
especially when you've got the Fed printing trillions of currency units to go into the repo market, quantitative
Oh,
easing,
yeah.
you've got the government
Yeah.
running $1 trillion deficits, and all these things equal long-term or inflation long-term. Whether we get that in the short term or mid-term is another question, but
Yeah.
long-term, all paths lead to inflation. So
Yes,
how
they
do
do.
we take advantage of that as the average guy?
Okay, so there are many aspects to this, but let's touch on three of them. Okay. Number one is leverage. The philosopher or physicist, maybe, or mathematician, I think, Archimedes of ancient times said, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum to place it on, and I will move the entire world. Right. And that shows the power of leverage. And income property is the most leverage favored asset class. Okay, meaning we can get the most debt, the best debt, and the longest debt on our income properties. And that makes it an incredibly favorable scenario because we get really good quality leverage on that property. We get leverage that'll probably never bring us a margin call. We get leverage that is fixed rate for 3 decades. If someone is listening to this today, George, and they go to jasonhartman.com, connect with one of our investment counselors, and buy a property, they don't have to make the last payment, or should I say, their tenant does not have to make the last payment
Yeah.
on that loan until 2050. Do you realize how much things will change by 2050? Number
Or how much
one,
inflation we'll get.
oh my God, it's incredible. We've got a debt exceeding, well over $20 trillion. We've got student loan debt now that's almost 7% of the entire GDP of the country. Okay. We've got a derivatives market of, who knows, but some say $700 trillion. I mean, there are so many crazy, absolutely nutty, crazy things going
Yeah,
on.
according to the IMF, corporate debt's at over 70% of GDP as well.
I mean, like you said, all roads lead to inflation. Debt says we're going to have inflation. Okay, it comes in varying degrees. Maybe it's not intense right now, but folks, what else can they do? I mean, inflation is the business plan that governments and central banks love because they can
Yeah.
inflate their way out of their problems. And we can complain about that. Yes, it's totally irresponsible. I completely agree. Philosophically, I hate it. However, we can benefit from it. So align our interests as investors with these very powerful entities. Okay. So that's the first concept, leverage. And that's what you're referring to. Second thing is what we talked about when we did a whole show on this, George, on your channel. Refer back to the episode we did on inflation induced debt destruction, which is not exactly leverage. It's not really leverage per se. It's a different benefit. Okay. Leverage is the one most people understand leverage, and we'll go back to that in a moment. But the third thing I want to mention that's very beneficial to people, and I alluded to this with you on another video we did, is risk management and asset protection. If you have a lot of debt on your properties, number one, a creditor, if you are ever in litigation, if you have someone sue you for something in your business or on a deal or a car accident, this can happen to anybody, right? And courts are weird. They don't make logical decisions. It's a complete game of lies and marksmanship and has nothing to do with the truth. Okay. We all have liability that we need to worry about, right? So when your properties are properly leveraged, you don't have much equity in them, which is great because they perform better that way and you manage your risk. What about a natural disaster or an insurance claim issue? Same idea. So that's the other thing. But your original thing you wanted to talk about is the leverage component, okay? And it's a beautiful thing because if you want to buy a stock or a bond or a mutual fund or probably a business, you're probably going to put 100% down. You're going to have to put all of the money into that deal. Okay. You're probably not going to get financing. If you want to buy precious metals or cryptocurrencies, same thing. The down payment is 100% in almost every case. Okay. With income property, you can put 20% down and you can control a larger asset with a smaller amount. I remember when I was a kid, George, funny thing we would do is as when the sun was at our back, we would always look at how big our shadow was. And it made us look like big people, right? Well, that's what leverage does for you with your properties. It makes you bigger than you really are, right? You can control $1 million worth of real estate for just over $200,000.
Yeah,
So you get to expand
I,
your reach.
I want to interject one thing here because I'm sure I'm going to have some viewers or people are listening to this and say, oh man, Jason's telling me that I should lever up to the hilt and that I should have no equity in my properties. And that just seems way too risky and
Right.
too dangerous. But
Yep.
I know you well enough to know that's not exactly what you're saying.
Yep.
And what you're saying is, yes, you want to use as much prudent leverage as you can, but you also want to make sure that you've got, let's call it an emergency fund for every, or
Yeah.
working capital, I think is a better
Right.
way to put it,
Yeah.
for each property. So
Hmm.
although you are leveraged, let's say at 80% of the property,
Which is not a lot of leverage, by the way. It's not 90%. It's not 95%.
right? But
80% is prudent. Yeah.
But what most people don't know if they don't listen to your podcast is that you also suggest that each property have, I think it's even 10% of the value of the property
Yeah.
in that working capital. So if you do have a renter that moves out and you've got occupancy for 2 months or 3 months, if you've got a roof that needs to be fixed, if you've got something that
Water
comes
heater.
up,
Things go
that you
wrong. Yeah.
got that covered and you're not just leveraged to the hilt to where you have to have that rent coming in or you're going to lose the property.
Good point. It's counterintuitive. Okay. What I'm proposing is this idea. Look at, I'm not saying don't have capital or don't have cash. I'm just saying separate the property from the capital. They're
Right.
different things, okay? And the minimum number you want to have in the reserve fund is 4% of the value of the
Four.
portfolio.
Okay. Okay.
So
Got it.
so and but you could have more, certainly that's the minimum. Okay? So you could have 10%, right? So if you have $1 million portfolio that might consist of 10 single family homes in diverse markets, this is the plan we would recommend. Maybe you're in 3 markets and you have 10 properties, okay? And that's $1 million worth of real estate. You've put $200,000 down on it. You got maybe 35,000, give or take, on closing costs to buy it, and that means you have 4% of the value of the portfolio in the bank. That's
Hmm.
$40,000. That's for vacancies, repair and maintenance issues, surprises. You will have problems. This is not a foolproof thing, okay?
Right.
It's just better than everything else. That's all I'm saying. But it's certainly not perfect and it's not without its challenges from time to time. So, just to wrap this topic up, the point of the leverage that George mentioned is that it's number one, it's self-liquidating debt. In other words, with income property, we don't pay our own debts. Our tenants or the properties pay the debt for us. We're just the middleman, if you will. And the asset produces the income to pay the debt and pay us hopefully some positive cash flow every month. And that's what happens. But if we have, and it's easier to use this with a 10% example because it's a round number for the zero. So I'll just use that as an example. If you put 10% down on $100,000 property and say the property goes up at, a sort of typical appreciation rate. I mean, it's arguable, but we'll call it 6%. Okay. So if it goes up in value after 1 year at 6%, and you're not selling it, so you don't have to think about closing cost or a bunch of complexity here. I'm just making a simplified example. You put in 10,000, it went up 6% on your 10%. That means your gross return on investment was 60%.
Yeah.
60%. Okay. Now you hold that over the course of 10 years, and that return on investment, that leveraged return on investment, just compounds and compounds and compounds. And this is why income property is the best wealth creating asset class in the entire world. It's very conservative. It just works. And you know that because you know people. If you haven't done it yourself, you know people. We all know people who have made fortunes, who have created substantial wealth with their income properties.
Yeah. And I want to point out too that when you talk about appreciation, even if it goes up with the rate of inflation,
Right?
so
You're
so
leveraging it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, you still get that additional purchasing power because you only have $10,000 in, but yet you're getting a $6,000. Well, it'd be a little less than a $6,000 gain because then you have to subtract inflation out of
Right.
that. But the bottom line is, if you go in there and buy a $100,000 property with 100,000 in cash, and it goes up to 106,000 because of inflation only,
Yeah.
you have not increased your purchasing power. Zero.
You know what, George?
None at all. But if you leverage it and you've only got 10,000 in, even if it just goes up with that rate of inflation, you've substantially
Oh,
increased your purchasing power.
yeah.
That's the point.
You know what? The math is quite easy on that. You can just do it with the percentages because you have a great video on how the CPI is the biggest scam in history, and you're absolutely right. It's a total lie. We all know Shadow Stats. I had John Williams on my podcast before, and he's the founder of the Shadow Stats
Yeah.
website, which
Yeah.
is very intriguing. So let's say the government lies about inflation. We probably all agree on that, and it's true. So why wouldn't we agree? They might tell us the inflation rate is, say, 2%. That's the Fed's target rate. But let's say the real inflation rate is 6%. Okay, 6%. And the property appreciated at 6. If you put 100% down, or maybe you bought a mutual fund or a stock and you put $100,000 into it and it went up 6%, well, your return was zero
Yeah.
because your inflation rate was 6% and your return was 6%, but it's actually less than zero because you have to pay taxes on that.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So you're actually getting taxed before inflation is considered. And that stinks. That's a terrible deal. But on the real estate, check it out. You had 6% appreciation. Inflation was 6%. So you think, oh, well, it's a wash. No, it's not a wash. Because remember, your return was 60% on the leveraged return. So
Hmm.
all you do is subtract the 6% from the 60%. You've got a 54% gross return on investment. Now, of
Right.
course, if you sold it in a year, you'd lose all that because you'd have closing cost and everything. But if you keep it over time and you keep it for 5 or 10 years, okay, your closing costs get paid by appreciation.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful thing.
And of
And we
course, that's
recommend
just
you
going to
keep it for even
compound as
longer.
well.
Yeah.
It's going to compound. We're just doing it over 1 year.
Right.
If you do that over 2, 3, 10 years,
Yeah.
then even if it's going up with the rate of inflation, that just compounds and grows and grows and grows. It's really, really substantial. And then you take
It's
into
inevitable.
consideration that you have no more out of pocket. Your cost basis is always 10 grand because your tenants are paying the mortgage and they're paying the utilities and they're paying the maintenance and
Yeah.
they're paying the property taxes.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's self-liquidating debt, and they're giving you maybe $200 a month extra per month to keep. Is
a positive
positive
cash
cash
flow.
flow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
paid to short
Hey,
the dollar.
George, you know what? Before we go, we should just look at a pro forma really quickly on an
Yes.
actual
Yes,
property.
that'd be
Let's do
awesome.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
So this, what you see on the screen here is my website. That's jasonhartman.com. And if I click here on the properties section, okay, click on properties. Here are some different markets that we're recommending right now. So you see, Jacksonville, St. Augustine, Florida. You see Memphis, Tennessee. You see, some South Central Pennsylvania, Little Rock, Arkansas, Indianapolis, North Indiana, Jackson, Mississippi, Kansas City, Orlando, Florida, Dayton, Ohio, and then we've got some other additional markets down here, okay? And let's just take a look at an actual property. So if you'd click on this, you'd see more about that particular area, and then it would take you to performas where you can actually see the numbers on these properties. Okay, so
Yeah.
you might see a video here that tells you about the market, some narrative information. Okay, but let's just click right over to an actual property. So here is a property in Little Rock, Arkansas that's on the screen. Now, Little Rock, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit so it's easier to see. Little Rock, or Arkansas in general, is the most landlord friendly market in the United States of America. Okay.
Almost
Uh,
ridiculously so.
very much, George. Literally, tenants can actually be jailed for not paying rent.
Put them in the barracks.
Yeah, it's like debtor's prison, right? And
Yeah,
listen,
yeah.
I'm not saying you should try to get your tenant arrested because if you do, they can't pay you when they're not working, okay?
Right.
But just the idea that people actually know that makes them more motivated, okay? And
Sure.
this property is a little duplex, okay? So it's a little duplex.
Oh, wow.
Each unit is 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, and has a carport. It's almost 2,000 square feet, and it's priced at 144.9. So it's very inexpensive property. And I'll just skip ahead a little bit here. In the bold, you see total cash needed to buy the property of about $45,000. That varies a little depending on the lender and the type of loan you choose because your closing cost will vary. The projected rent here is $13.50 per month
Okay, so we're
and
almost at a 1% RV there.
almost 1%. And here are your projected expenses on the property. We always tell our clients really the two that you want to pay really good attention to are property taxes and insurance. And you want to double verify those numbers, okay?
Yeah.
Because those are commonly underestimated by the local market specialist or the seller. So pay special attention to those, and our investment counselors will help you with all this. The projected cash flow is 339 a month, which is better than most of our properties. Um,
Positive cash flow. Yeah.
Positive cash flow, 339 a month or $4,000 per year. Okay. And remember, you only invested about 45,000 to acquire the property. You did not invest the purchase price of 144. Of course, this is all subject to qualifying for financing. This is 25% down, so it's even more conservative than what we just discussed with 20% down.
Hmm.
Now, these financial indicators in this section, okay, right in the center of the screen, the first one is called the debt coverage ratio. And that ratio is not thought about enough. But if you're a conservative investor, I really want you to pay attention to this one. This ratio could be expressed as the how likely is it that I would ever get into trouble with that property ratio? Okay, that's the debt coverage ratio. And this one is 1.6, which means the likelihood of you ever getting into trouble with this property is pretty low. That that's a very desirable debt coverage ratio. Now, I'm going to skip the next two. Those aren't really that great. And even the third one isn't really that great, but a lot of people talk about it. So I do want to cover this one. It's called the capitalization rate or cap rate. I don't really like this metric very much, but it is commonly used and thrown around in the commercial real estate world. I sarcastically call it the crap rate, okay? Because it doesn't give me enough information. I don't like the crap rate very much. And it's because it doesn't include leverage, meaning financing your good debt, and it
Yeah.
doesn't include appreciation. Okay. It only is a metric that compares the net income, the NOI, the income after all your expenses, with the exception of your mortgage or debt service, okay, to the price of the property.
Yeah.
So
I think it's
here,
more applicable to cash buyers.
yeah, absolutely. Here it is 7.5%, your cap rate, which is a very good cap rate, by the way. You won't, if this were a California property, that would probably say 2%. Maybe it'd even be 1%. Okay.
Okay.
A better one is cash on cash return. This one is 9% on this property. And what that means, George, is the comparison between the amount of money you put into the property versus the income you get out of the property.
Hmm.
It does not include appreciation, okay, or depreciation for that matter. So if you bought this property and you think the market's going to crash and you think, oh, values are going to go down by 25%, as long as you maintain the same income and expense ratio, you'll get your 9% every year, no matter what the value of the property. And
Right.
as you've pointed out so well before, George, when the market declines, this is another thing that maybe we do a future episode on. When the market declines, interestingly, a lot of times rents actually strengthen
Hmm.
because the tenants in the tenant pool can't buy anything, or if they could, they don't want to buy anything. So there's actually upward pressure on rents in markets where prices are declining. It's counterintuitive. You hear the old saying, how's the real estate market? Well, I don't know what that means. First of all, I don't know where it means. I don't know if it's Los Angeles or Indianapolis or Little Rock or Miami or Boston. I don't know. So there's lots of real estate markets. That's the first problem. But the second problem is, what type of property is it? Is it a commercial property, a residential property? Is it industrial, shopping center, office space? What is it, right? So how's the market? I don't know. But the other part of it is that, is it the rental market or the for sale market?
Right.
Now,
Good
most people
point.
would call a good market, in quotes, is a market where prices are going up and it's a seller's market, versus a buyer's market is when prices are going down. When properties are sitting on the market a long time, most people call that a buyer's market. But guess what? The reason they're sitting on the market a long time is because affordability is low and the
Mhm.
deals aren't good. Okay. The reason it's a seller's market is because the deals are attractive and people want to buy them. So these things are misnomers. Okay.
Right.
Don't fall for this. You really need to think it through. Okay. So in a good real estate market, usually that means prices are going up and renters are jumping to buy as soon as they possibly can. Okay. They want to get out of the renter pool and move to the owner pool. They want to become owners, they want to become homeowners. So usually rents will soften in highly appreciating markets with good housing affordability. Rents will soften. When
Mhm.
housing affordability is low and properties are sitting on the market and interest rates are high and prices are soft, that's when rents go up. Okay.
Right.
People that own a lot of property have already got their properties and they've got their financing. They love high interest rates. High interest rates mean upward pressure on rents because nobody can afford to buy. They got to stay in the renter pool, and the renter pool grows, and landlords ratchet up the rents. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, overall return on investment in bold here, this one is projected at 32%. That is an annual number, folks. That is annually. Now, income property is a multi-dimensional asset class, meaning that you earn your return in a lot of different ways. So looking at the pro forma here, let's look at how we earn our return, right? We've got a low down payment. So we've got this self-liquidating debt. The tenant pays us rent, and I'm using my mouse to point at these things now. The
Mhm.
tenant pays us rent. So down here we have positive cash flow of 339 a month, or over 4,000 a year. So
Right.
that's one area we get return from. Another area we get return from is right below it. It's called principal reduction. $140 a month, or almost $1,700 per year, is going to pay off our loans for us.
Yeah.
And
Which
guess
I
who's
might.
paying them? Our
Yeah.
tenants.
Yeah. Your tenants. Exactly. I'm sorry to cut you off there, but one point I wanted to make that's very important is that's just for year one. If this was year 10, that would be
Oh,
a
yeah.
much bigger number. Year 20, an even bigger number. And everyone that's had a mortgage before knows what I'm talking about.
George, we have a name for that. Well, we have two names for it.
You
The
got a
first,
name for everything, buddy.
yeah, yeah.
You
We
got
You know what we call that? That's amortization or principal reduction. We call
Okay.
it the big boring idea. It's the big boring idea. It's
I
going
need some
on.
of these
Yeah,
catchphrases. How
yeah,
do you think of these things? We got to sit down next episode and write down some catchphrases for my
yeah.
YouTube channel.
When you can express things, people understand them better.
Yeah,
So
for
the
sure, for
big
sure.
boring idea is the amortization on your loans. Amort, which is the root of amortization, means to kill. It's Latin. Amort is to kill. So literally, amortization is to kill the mortgage, right?
Mm.
That's what amortization is. So every month we're killing the mortgage at a rate of $140.
Your tenants
Okay.
are, yeah.
Tenants are doing it for you. Yes, you outsource your debt obligations to the tenants. I wouldn't like debt if I had to pay it myself, but here the tenants pay for it. So that's another area of return. Now, tax savings is another area. This program does not do a very good job of calculating tax savings, so we just leave it out. Okay, we don't
Okay,
use that feature, and everybody's tax situation is so different that we just don't go there. Okay.
got it. Got
Uh,
it.
so you've got that, and then you've got your appreciation. Now, look at the assumptions. We didn't talk about this yet. Okay. The assumptions that drive these numbers are 6% appreciation. Now, that's an average over time. It might not happen some years and it might be better other years. We're just using an average predicting, and it's a prediction. So, it is worth what it costs, right? It's a prediction. Vacancy rate never fall for the hypester and the sleazy operator out there who doesn't include a vacancy rate of your properties. We always assume that properties will be vacant for 1 month every year, which means about an 8% vacancy rate. That's equal to 1 month per year, 1 month that you're not going to get any income. Okay. And then we have a management fee for property management. Now, if you self manage, you won't have any fee here. Here, we're assuming the management fee is 10% of the rent every month.
Hmm.
And you're also going to have to spend some money on maintenance and repairs. We're assuming that you'll spend here, and you see my mouse, 5% of the income every month on maintenance and repairs. Okay.
Right.
So those are the assumptions that drive this for an overall projected return on investment of 32% annually.
Okay.
And look at what I always say is if you don't understand how these numbers are calculated, I do a 27-minute video on this. It's totally free. Go to jasonhartman.com. You'll see me go through every single number on this pro forma. Okay. Just go to jasonhartman.com. It's a free video, 27 minutes long. It'll make you a great investor, teach you how to analyze a real estate deal. The other thing, let's assume it doesn't work out this well. Assume it only goes half as well as
Yeah.
predicted. You would get a 16% return on investment. That's still pretty good. Mind you, that the scam artist Bernie Madoff, his big promise of that scammer, one of the biggest crooks ever, right? The biggest Ponzi scheme in American history besides Social Security was Bernie Madoff.
The
Okay. He,
Fed.
he, by the way, George said he got the idea from Social Security.
Yeah. Yeah.
His promise to investors was I can get you 9 to 12% annually every year, year in and year out. Well, you can do that with your properties. Pretty,
Yeah.
I think you'll be pretty likely to achieve that, if not a lot better.
Yeah, Jason, one thing I just saw there, I want to point out before we head out is
Sure.
if you go to the top, can you scroll up to the top there? I
Mhm.
saw that you've got a tab for the 10-year numbers as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, the 10-year projection, we don't use this very much because it's a little hard to understand. It gets pretty complicated. But, for
Okay.
your listeners who are really econ numbers pros,
Yeah, I think they'd
you know,
really like that.
this this is I'm going to zoom out on this a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Let me just zoom out here. There it is. There's your 10-year projection. Now, this includes another component, and that is right down here called internal rate of return, right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Now, this is what would be considered the holy grail of metrics for an investor. It's called IRR, or internal rate of return. And I remember when I was 19 years old in my first year of college, and I had just received my real estate license a long, long time ago, I was taking a bunch of commercial real estate classes.
Hmm.
And I wanted to become a CCIM, which is sort of the PhD in real estate, if you will. And that stands for Certified Commercial Investment Manager, CCIM. And those classes were very hard. Now, we used to have to calculate internal rate of return by hand. and that was hard to do. It took a long time.
Yeah.
Because what this number does, George, is it calculates a stream of cash flows over time and net present value, which is basically the impact of those cash flows versus inflation. Okay. And it includes the closing cost when you liquidate the asset. Okay.
Mhm.
So it's a pretty hefty metric. But if you want to learn about IRR, number one, our software will do it. You can just go to realestatetools.com or really directly to this one at propertytracker.com. Or just, I'm sure there's some good information about there online. So you can look it up. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jason, thank you again for your time and being here. I can't wait to get you back on the show to where we can discuss real estate even further and educate the viewers out there. For anyone who wants to check out these pro formas, I mean, they're just free right there on your
Yeah.
website. I'm assuming
Absolutely.
you just go there and check them out and learn and just dive into the numbers. Your web address again is jasonhartman.com, right?
You got it, jasonhartman.com. And here, by the way, is that video I just referenced. We're looking at the page now.
Oh, how
How
to
to
analyze. Yep.
analyze a real estate investment and read a pro forma. It's free. It's 27 minutes long. It'll make you a great investor. If there's nothing else you do, listen to that one.